Benny, please take it away.
Sure thing. Hi, everybody. It was great to meet some folks in the breakout room. As you know, those things move super quickly, but I'm going to take that as a idea of who's in this chat and this call, and I'll try to steer what I say towards the use cases that I heard at least a little bit of. About me, my name is Benny. This is my third company. It's called Senders. You can see the name across the side. Senders became a company that's almost entirely concerned with email deliverability. We didn't start as a company concerned with email deliverability. We started as a company that was focused on lead gen, but realized that email deliverability was such a huge part of this. And we eventually moved on to also helping companies that are B2C senders or newsletter senders solve their most sort of confounding email deliverability issues. And so today we're going to talk about email deliverability. Before that, I had a company that did marketing services that I sold. And in between one successful exit and Senders, I had a company that was very early in influencer marketing that we built software for, we raised money for, and we failed absolutely miserably. So I've sort of sat on both sides of being on the profitable agency side and the in the trenches, dying very slowly, terrible software founder side. So that gives you a little bit of insight into just the kinds of scars, so to speak. So from what I understand from the group here, we probably have a mix of people that are very, very early stage, maybe even some later stage, which means there are B2B senders and there are B2C senders. B2B, meaning you're emailing other businesses for the purpose of lead gen. B2C tends to mean it's full opt-in emails. You're collecting email addresses from shopping cart information or from newsletters, and you're trying to use that to sort of do outreach. Both of those are legitimate forms of sending, even though folks like to think that B2B or cold email sending is somehow nefarious and spam. Technically, according to the law, I'm not a lawyer, but B2B sending is actually quite legitimate. You're allowed to send business solicitation emails, and we have a right to be able to send them. The problem, of course, is that email is largely misunderstood. And it's misunderstood because pretty much since the dawn of email, what people see it as, email has been a sort of space where you go to write things and you click send and then they magically appear on the other side. They don't really understand that email itself is more layered and there's more nuances to it. So the more you understand email, the more likely you are to be able to diagnose and understand email deliverability problems. Most people conflate or sort of see their ESP, their email service provider, as their email system, but actually behind the front end where you're typing in an email and clicking send, there's a whole bunch of mechanisms in place that make email able to function. And usually there's some issue with what's behind the email service provider that's creating problems, or a misuse of the email service provider. So basically using email for the wrong purpose, and an email service provider for the wrong purpose. The most classic example of that is cold email from something like Google Mail. There are basically four types of email. There's corporate mail, which is the mail you send back and forth with people inside your company or to your investors or clients. There's newsletter style marketing mail. And that kind of mail tends to be people who have opted in, they're external to your company in some way. The third way is cold email, like sales emails. And the fourth one is transactional emails. Transactional emails are like password resets and things like that. Each four of these different kinds of email really need to be treated as totally separate email functions inside your org. And in a second, I'm going to talk about what that means. Most people initially think your email service provider, whatever it is, should be able to handle all four. And that usually is the root of many, many email deliverability issues. So taking a look at the way email is being used in your org and making sure that there's a special built tool or a sort of division between them is like critically important to email issues writ large and sort of unwinding those issues. Email works very roughly by you writing an email, like writing a letter by hand on a piece of paper. That's your like Google Mail interface or your Outlook interface. And then you put in the envelope and you write the address on it. What's the email to field? And then you walk it to the mailbox and you drop it in. That's all what looks like on the front end. On the back end, what's happening is when you walk into the mailbox and drop it in, the email has to be sent from somewhere. And that is typically a single IP address, or if you're sending a lot of mail, an array of IP addresses. The IP address is not in good shape or in bad shape, as it were, or you don't really know how good shape the IP address is, you're going to run into email deliverability problems. Most people say, well, it's a Google problem, it's a Marketo problem, it's a HubSpot problem, but oftentimes it's many layers deeper. It's an IP address problem. So sometimes it makes sense to incorporate ways to track IP addresses that are actually being sent from, or move sending from one place you're sending to another. So IP addresses become critically important in this mix, and they're basically essential to the idea of sending email. The next word here is subdomain. When I was talking about email fencing, that's the term that we use for separating all the 4 types of email into different buckets. Subdomains are usually the best bet for doing this rather than having completely separate domains. So subdomain basically is taking your domain, like let's say your domain is google.com, and inserting a subdomain underneath it, try.google.com, email.google.com. If you look through your email inbox at all the emails that you've gotten over the last month, 6 months, year, or whatever, the large and reputable senders like airlines and big fashion brands or whatever are almost all sending every email from a subdomain. And it's usually early stage companies that are sending everything from their main domain. And the reason is that they've also done the thing we talked about, which is separating out their different forms of sending into different buckets and handling each one separately. And subdomains are a very, very efficient way to separate them out. And this is especially important for cold emails, which are the most toxic of all the email types. Authentication is a general catch-all term for all the things that indicate to the recipient that you are who you say you are, and the emails are being sent legitimately. Because email itself is an open protocol, similar to United States Postal Service, technically there's nothing really stopping me from writing an email or writing a letter, a handwritten letter, and writing from the return address that I'm President Barack Obama, and writing the White House address in the return field and taking it to the mailbox and dropping it in there and shipping and sending it to someone, basically pretending to be from the White House. Email, you can do something similar. It's called spoofing, where you basically pretend to be a sender that you aren't. So what happens is you're taking this email to the edge of the internet and you're basically saying, hey, I'm this person, you should receive it. And in the past, people could easily do spam by just sending an email from Bank of America to someone claiming to be Bank of America. So what authentication does is it tries to authenticate the actual sender to make sure that doesn't happen. Those are SPF, DMARC, DKIM, and these all sit in the behind in the sending, and they authenticate the sender. For each of these subdomains you need for all these different forms of sending, you have to have proper authentication for each, and that means proper DNS record alignment, SPF, DMARC, DKIM. I don't think we have time to go over each one of those, but happy to dig into it. I see a lot of action in the chat, which I will swing back around during the Q&A. I want to make sure I'm somewhat on the right track. Fencing is the term that senders uses to demarcate and divide between the different types of sending. My hunch is that a lot of folks in this chat are earlier stage. Some of you might be software entrepreneurs. You might be running SaaS platforms or marketplaces or things like that. If you look carefully at almost all the emails that come from the more established players in your space, what you'll find is that password reset emails typically come from something like passwordreset.domain.com or transactional dot or t dot or some sort of subdomain sending. Oftentimes those emails themselves are coming from completely separate IP pools. So they're going to a purpose-built IP provider or an email provider to have those emails sent and delivered. Same with marketing. You might get emails from email.jetblue.com or marketing dot something like that. Same thing. And those marketing emails might be going out of IP addresses that are managed by another provider. Corporate mail typically comes from the main domain. I would recommend that unless you're an actual social app of some sort. For example, facebook.com. Corporate mails never come from facebook.com. Their corporate mail is housed at fb.com, and they have a separation between the two because it's better to have separation between them. And then lastly, sales emails you're probably going to need many subdomains to send from for sales emails because they're so caustic and they can cause so many problems. The AUP is the short for acceptable use policy. The number one problem and the number one root of email problems is from abusing the acceptable use policy of the system you're sending from. So we oftentimes see deliverability problems. Someone says, hey, we're sending from HubSpot, but we're all going to spam. And you say, well, you're sending cold emails from HubSpot, which you're not really supposed to. That violates their acceptable use policy, threatens you getting banned, and also not what it's built for. Therefore, it's not surprising that problems are arising. Same thing with Google. Google acceptable use policy very clearly states you should not be sending unsolicited emails from Google. If you do that, you're in violation of their acceptable use policy, and you can't really blame them for trying to throttle you or stop you from doing that. So understanding that you're actually using the tool you're using for the right purpose is really important. And oftentimes many issues can be avoided if you simply use the right tool for the right job. This word is memes because I made some deliverability memes because they're fun and everyone enjoys them. Early signs of deliverability problems almost or very, very rarely resolve themselves. And we can talk about what signs those are, but typically you see a change in open rates or reply rates or engagement. Usually it's very sudden, and sometimes it recovers immediately, but usually it does not. And oftentimes it's a one particular email recipient type server is basically being like, your emails are suspect, like, no, thank you. So I recommend that you look at and tackle deliverability problems really, really soon and start to try to diagnose the issues. Resolving deliverability problems is much harder than diagnosing them. And that's because usually these are multi-factor issues that have come up. They're not usually just one single thing. If they're one single thing, you can oftentimes correct that one single thing and you're sort of back in action. The next one is about acceptable use policies. We see Google on the left, and it says you sending cold email violating your acceptable use policy. Oftentimes what cold email senders try to do is they say, aha, if I slide under the radar and I have 40 Google accounts that are each only sending 30 emails a day, I can magically skirt Google's policies, which I don't recommend and we never do for our clients because it's a very ridiculous thing to do, but it's very, very common. So we always think about Google is kind of hunting you in a way like this robot is. This is about DNS records, which I mentioned, SPF, DMARC, DKIM. Oftentimes, it seems like a small thing, a slightly misconfigured DNS record somewhere else inside the org, but those oftentimes ramp up to being something that's horrifying for any person that's worked at a company before, which is your CEO's emails to investors going to spam. And this one is about subdomain usage. So you guys still send emails from your main domain. I think you'd be shocked and dismayed how many Series A, Series B, and later founders and tech teams we talk to that haven't quite fully realized that they're sending out thousands and thousands and thousands of password reset emails or whatever from their main domain and potentially risking many, many problems at the moment or later on down the road. And this is the final one, I believe, which is, I have one more after this, which is the types of headaches. Migraine, hypertension, stress, and damaged domain is the preeminent one because it affects almost every aspect of your business. And then this one for cold email senders, the hard to swallow pills, some cold emails will always go to spam. So it doesn't really matter how much work you do. Well, this can pretty much be said for almost all emails. Going to spam is actually not the worst thing in the world because it means that it got through the quarantine process of email delivery and someone thought it worthy of at least putting in some inbox. So that's a little bit of a silver lining there. I think that's all that I had prepared here with a few notes at the end in case there are deeper questions. Should we jump into the Q&A?
Yeah, Benny, that was awesome. Like, I felt like I was drinking from a fire hose. There are a couple of questions in the chat. I put one in and Parker put one in, and we got upvotes on trying to understand what it means to have an IP address in good shape or in bad shape. Like, how do you know? What is that?
Okay, so I'm going to give you the deeper answer. I'm not going to skirt over it. So tell me if this is too much detail. Most email marketers should not be terribly concerned with IP address. So for example, if you set up Substack or you use HubSpot for marketing, or you use Marketo, if you use Braze, if you're a more established company, use Braze. They're supposed to be handled, even Klaviyo, if you're an e-commerce marketer, they're supposed to be handling the IP address quality, and they typically outsource it. They work with another company like Spark Post or something like that, or Intercom. Yeah, MailChimp, for example. Now, that basically means that as long as you're following their acceptable use policy, they should be delivering emails properly for you. And there's no mechanism for you typically to query which IP addresses are being used for the sending from those particular places. In other words, if you're having an issue with MailChimp and you go to MailChimp chat and you say, MailChimp, I'd like you to tell me which IP addresses you're sending my emails from so I can check on their health. They will not share that with you. They don't typically know which IP addresses because they have a very large array of IP addresses, and every email or batch of emails being sent from a different one, and that's acceptable. Now, where guys like us come into play is if MailChimp tells you, we don't see any problem, you're on your own, it sometimes behooves you to do one of a couple things. One is extricate your sending from somewhere like MailChimp to where you can expose the inner workings. The second one is oftentimes there are particular ways that these companies handle their IP addresses, and they oftentimes demote you to worse pools of IP addresses sort of automatically if they think that you're doing low quality sending. So sometimes it's a matter of having a conversation with the company and saying like, hey, did we get into a bad pool? Can you help us understand why this might be happening? And sometimes if you dig deep enough, they'll let you. Oftentimes what happens is in those scenarios, folks come to us and we do the hard work of analyzing who are the recipients, which servers are they, stress testing each one to try to figure out if there's one particular kind of sender that's pulling down your deliverability score, remedying that, and then having you communicate through to your email service provider like MailChimp or whatever. Hey, we fixed this problem. Can you make sure that the people behind the people who manage the IP addresses know that we're in like better shape now and we should be a good client for you now? Does that generally make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll probably have to listen to that recording again, but,
Sorry.
but you did a great job. It's just my digestion is maybe a little slow. It looks like Chad and Jeremy may have some questions. You can either
Chad,
unmute yourself, Chad, or give us
Chad, question. Do you want to answer it? Do you want me to answer it just based on what you typed here?
Yeah, that's fine. I was just had a question about content related deliverability issues in addition to the technical side.
Sure. Are you a newsletter type sender or a cold email sender?
So I am the founder of a fractional CMO firm, and so we have clients who run the whole gamut. Every scenario that you've described, we have an example of.
Got it. So spam, first of all, I doubt that you're a spammer or any of your clients are spammers.
Thank you for that vote of trust.
Well, typically spammers, what they're doing is they're doing some sort of deceit or misdirection of some sort. And that misdirection takes on many forms, but typically it takes on the form of links that don't quite go where you think they're going to go. So the way that blunt force people do is like, okay, I'm going to send emails with no links. You're like, okay, there are no links in the email. If there's no links in the email, there's no chance of it being misdirected in any way. There's nothing wrong with taking that dramatic step if that's a step that makes sense. And you might see an uptick in deliverability by removing links. The problem with that is that if you think about it from the perspective of a marketer, someone that's not doing sales emails, if you don't have a link, you don't have anything, because where's your call to action if it doesn't have a link? And links actually can be seen as interaction. So what I would say is, for a newsletter sender, the best way to prevent most spam issues is to make sure that all your links go directly somewhere, so they don't have redirects in them. They're not hidden under a bit.ly or something like that. You can use UTM parameters, which is great. UTM parameters aren't redirects. They're just a little bit of code that indicates to Google or whomever that there's some tracking happening behind the link, or however you want to frame that. But don't do redirects. On the other side, if you're a cold email sender, you can make sure you can do your best to remove links, or the best way to improve spam conditions overall is to encourage replies like, "Would this kind of thing interest you?" or whatever the call to action is going to be, rather than directing people through links. And it seems to be because there's a relationship between how much genuine interaction an email sender gets with how well their emails perform. The other thing is, I would not be sending any emails from main domains at all, because too many things, as I mentioned in the presentation, too many things interact with too many things to make it so it's hard to get a readout of whether your marketing email really is just having a problem and that's why it's going to spam, or is the sales team doing a tremendous amount of cold emailing from the same domain, and that's pulling down the deliverability of the whole thing of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. Oh, and Ogden from my team, thanks Ogden, I appreciate it, said that our blogs have a bunch of information too. Let's see, shared hosting like Bluehost. Been blocked from them before for someone else on my server box, and I have to call them to get it fixed. So Jeremy, that's a really good question. I can't speak specifically to Bluehost. Most of what you're talking about is IP neighbors. And if you have bad IP neighbors, then issues can present themselves with what you're doing too. There is a double-edged sword with dedicated IPs. So in almost all email systems, you can request dedicated IPs. And it seem like dedicated IPs might seem like an upgrade, like at a WeWork or something. You're like, oh, I'm in a dedicated office. Like, look, I have my own office. That's better than it was being in like general, the shared section or something. But in some ways, and this, you guys are going to laugh at my analogy because I'm taking it much further. In some ways, it's not actually better. It's more like solitary confinement. So you might say, hey, I really want to be in a dedicated office at the WeWork, but I don't want to be in solitary confinement if I'm in prison. What happens if you do dedicated IPs and you really don't have enough volume or proper tools in place to manage an IP address, which is actually a big responsibility, is your dedicated IP just suffers very, very soon and early. So in the unlikely chance that you end up with IP neighbors that are really, really bad, you can potentially talk to your IP provider, Bluehost, whoever it is, and ask and say, hey, there's something wrong. We'd like to be moved. And they can do that. Don't always take the bait to move to an upgraded dedicated IP, because it actually might be a lot more like a problem where you're not really equipped to handle that, even though they're going to charge you for the honor of having a dedicated IP. Does that sort of talk around the issue at least a little bit, Jeremy?
Yeah, that was great. And then I also have a follow-up question to that also, which was the second part of the next one on the post.
Are a bunch of people on this call Google users and do some or a lot of sales emails directly from Google?
Personally, I do all mine through Bluehost. I don't do anything through Google, but I've had some limits and an email stating that I'm abusing their policy, even though everyone that I use, everyone I'm emailing. So I had a Facebook campaign that we did. We got 600,000 followers in a couple of months, and I would say about a third of them all subscribed to our update newsletter. And the first couple emails went out to, I believe it was roughly 50,000 people. And we had almost 100% rate of everybody downloading the pamphlet that we were offering through that, because 90% of everybody signed up to get the pamphlet. So, So, but then after that, we started getting notifications and things. So I was just kind of curious if, because I mean, everybody's signed up, so I'm not abusing or called anything on that, but yet I'm still getting red flagged for it.
Right. So that sounds like a very specific Bluehost style problem. From Bluehost perspective, you can obviously understand why they'd think that your sudden thousands of people subscribe is suspect. I mean, it makes sense why they would say that. I think that oftentimes the burden of proof falls on you, and it's almost impossible unless you have a personal relationship with like your account manager at one of these places to sort of get them to be okay with whatever you're doing if it seems somewhat suspect in some way. I would say that if they are 100% legitimate and you still want to keep emailing them and Bluehost is giving you a hard time, you actually could just go shop for other backend providers that you can explain to them the situation and get their approval to be like, yeah, that makes sense. We can see here from the data you gave us that these are opt-in. Like, please go forth and email them. Most folks do have a process for approving someone doing that. Like if you move this to someone else, somewhere else. You said, can you still use Google and such then? I would say that from Google's perspective and Microsoft's perspective, it basically has less to do with you actually having approval to email large numbers of people and their perception of what you're doing. Google has mysterious limits that they impose on people anyway. Bluehost might also have limits that they impose on people, and whether they're explicit or non-explicit. I have people tell me all the time, oh, well, Google allows 500 email sends a day. And I'm like, well, if you spin up a new Google Workspace account and try to send 50 emails a day, they're probably going to stop you. So you might have read somewhere that there's some sort of limit that's placed somewhere that they publish, but that doesn't mean that they're allowing that number of emails to be sent. So there could be something buried in Bluehost's acceptable use policy that basically gives them the right to chop you down, even if you think you have a right to do it. I mean, and technically they can have whatever acceptable use policy they want. They're private companies after all. Let's see. I send emails from a .media domain. Yeah, so new top-level domains sometimes do have problems. It's a true issue. One thing you could do is use an alternate domain that you've set up and warmed up that isn't a .media domain. And after someone replies to the .media email, you can then email from the .media. So sometimes it's the initial email that causes a lot of the issues. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it's the first email. I'll get that reject, and it's a server thing. They just have to wait till they approve it.
Do you have other domains?
Right now, no.
Okay, well, I think for everyone here, it behooves you to set up and warm up alternate domains, set up and warm up subdomains, if that's something that you have the technical chops to pull off. If anything, they can come in handy later if you have an issue. And best case scenario, or another case scenario, is you actually use them for something. But yes, top level domains that are longer than a few characters sometimes do produce issues, and some of them are oftentimes rejected, even if they're warm and seems fine.
Hey,
and I
Benny?
think like
Any quick follow up on that? How do you know when a domain is warmed up or warm enough?
so. Are a lot of people here familiar with the concept of domain warming and generally what that means? Basically,
primer might help.
sure, very simple. The concept behind domain warming is when a domain is new, or you're trying to get more email volume out of an email domain, you run it through a system that artificially generates email traffic. So it's sending fake emails to other users that then reply, and it generates fake traffic back and forth. There are basically three purposes for this kind of technology. The first one is it's supposed to train Google, I'm presenting the issue with it from the get-go. It's supposed to train Google that the emails you're sending aren't spam, because every email that gets delivered, the system goes, is it spam? Is it not spam? If marked as spam, remove it from the spam box and say it's legitimate. So that's part of the way email warming systems work. That claim, a little bit dubious, not really sure if that's true, although email warming people that sell these software claim that's 100% true. The second thing it does, email warming, is it's emailing to different kinds of email servers, and it's giving you information back on whether it went to the spam inbox or not. That's important because if you're seeing green lights all across the board from your email warming software, your email might be warm enough. If you're seeing lots of yellows and reds where it's like not getting delivered properly, you might say, okay, I need to leave this warming for a period of time before it goes, it's ready to be emailed. I would say for brand new domains, on our team, we don't start warming brand new domains that come from a client. We don't even start warming until the domain is 30 days old. And the reason is that new domains are full scale blocked by a lot of email service providers. Basically, what a lot of companies in the world have determined is if you have a domain that's under 30 days old, you shouldn't be emailing my company at all. Because in the past, you can imagine spammers, you spin up a new domain every 5 minutes and you blast out emails. There's sort of no good has ever come from someone that started an email domain and started emailing right away. So there's a lot of rejects that happen from that. And then the other side of it is email. It looks very suspect if you spin up a new domain and instantly you're sending 200 to 500 emails, whether they're fake or not. So we tend to wait 30 days, and then we tend to look at between 2 and 4 weeks of warming, very earnest warming using software like MailReach, MailWarm. There's a whole bunch of software there that are supposed to serve this purpose before we consider if we're going to deploy the email, whether it's an email from a subdomain or a main domain.
Hey, Benny, I know we're at time, but I had a quick question with Outlook. With our breakout group, I actually mentioned that we have the domain email, which is focused and other, and then we also have a junk mail folder, and now we even have still another folder that is that is actually quarantined. And I was curious if subject length, it seems that subject length seems to put them into the non-focused area. And do you have any ideas as far as subject length when sending out marketing emails to have them potentially go to that focus folder instead of going into one of the other three that the people may just browse and just delete, and you never even get read?
Sure, that's a good question. To answer that very briefly, I think that you're not going to like this answer, Dave, so apologies. Almost every single email recipient on the planet, their focused folder, priority inbox, etc., is configured differently. Because as soon as you turn on that feature, Google and Microsoft are trying to guess and trying to figure out what you're doing and what you're interacting with and sort of moving things back and forth between these folders. So it could be a bias on your end or the way your email service or the way you interact with your email service. There could be a bias towards marketing emails having long subject lines or something like that. Typically, for cold email, if you look at tools like Lavender, which basically analyze cold emails, for example, and try to help you write the best text for it, which is pretty cool. What they typically recommend and what we recommend to our clients is like 2 or 3 word subject lines tend to work really well. They kind of mimic what people write in internal emails, and they have a little bit of mystery, but they aren't too strange. So there's no real reason to do anything longer for cold. For marketing emails, probably the marketers on this call know better than I do. You know how to build intrigue with subject lines. You know how to delight with a subject line. You know how to get someone to be like, darn, I got to open this thing. Maybe that requires a little bit of length. I don't think there's a strong correlation between length of subject line and what gets sorted, but I can guarantee you that I might be wrong. And I can guarantee you that whatever that is probably changing all the time. And I can also guarantee you that every single email filter on the way in is probably treating emails slightly differently. If that makes
Okay.
sense.
Yeah, very helpful. Thank you.
So we usually wrap up about 5 minutes ago, but the Q&A is just awesome. I see some more questions in there. Maybe we could do one more question and then wrap it up, Benny. Or if you have words of wisdom that you would leave with us, that would be helpful. But also, it looks like there are a bunch of comments in there from your team on resources. And then I would invite everybody to reach out to you if they have additional questions. But Benny, any parting words of wisdom before we wrap up?
Yeah, I would like to make a personal plea. From my perspective, there's absolutely no downside to having someone take a look at email deliverability stuff. And we spend a lot of time talking with companies that can't really afford to hire a company to look at email deliverability. And we're more than happy to spend time with people pointing them in the right direction or saying like, maybe you should look into this or maybe you should look into that. Because a lot of the stuff we're talking about is not proprietary, crazy, detailed stuff. It's sort of out there. The problem is there's so much information out there that it becomes very difficult to parse. So feel free to reach out to me or anyone on our team and we can schedule a call to like dig into your particular scenario and we can send you on your way with some homework. The one area that we do almost never try to give advice on is cold email. We like to actually host cold emails because cold email, as I mentioned, is pretty toxic. So if you get in a call with me and you're trying to get information from us about like, how can we make our cold emails, I'm going to be like, I'm going to be a little bit cagey with advice and sort of be like, you should hire us to help you with that. That's my only little caveat there. But at the same time, I'm totally happy to chat with anyone and love to hear people's email stories and whatnot. And I really appreciate the chance to chat with everyone. I really hope that some bit of it, whether here on replay or whatever, is useful to everyone. And I hope that everyone gets into the main inbox every time.
Thanks, Benny. This was awesome. Yes, I'm sure people will be reviewing this quite a bit. Thank you for your time. Thanks for sharing your insight and experience. And thanks everybody for joining. We'll see you all back here next week and have a great week until we see you.